Lutheran church today. This is, that house was built by lumber people by the name of Buell. On your right is the only picture that I've seen of the courthouse. That building, I mean, on your left is the courthouse. That burned down eventually. Know where I'm talking about?
Yeah, here in the Union.
We're going right down the street.
You're going east?
I'm going east, thank you. Going east. This is the Cadillac parking lot. The building on your right still is there. That's where Nancy Brown lives, where the Calkinses lived, where Mark Deering lives. And these were businesses in the heyday, in the late 1800s, and those buildings were there up to probably sometime in the 60s. I can remember peddling papers to Charlie Hulk, who lived in one of the apartments up above.
Was it a boardwalk, sidewalk?
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. And I don't know exactly what the circumstances were, but my great-grandmother sued the village over that. I'm not sure how it came out, but I remember seeing that. This is Barnes, right on the corner, northwest corner, four corners, Bell's Drugstore. This is 1870s picture. The building in to your left would be part of what would eventually become the bank building.
What's the big pole? What was that?
I don't know how I'm not sure exactly about that, but they put up poles for political purposes. Now, outside of that, I can't help you. But if you read in the Jeff, say the Republicans put up a poll today up on the corner, or the Democrats put up a poll today.
There's not nothing Republican. That's all they have.
But I don't have any idea how that worked or what the circumstances were. Now there's a picture of the same drugstore, 1930s. Right in front of the car on your left is the post office. That's what that sign says, except that you can't really read it. And if you'll notice, at this point, in back of the drugstore where, I'm not sure who has that building now, there isn't anything. That's a vacant lot back there, always had a sign back there. Post office is just to the left of Bell's Drugstore. The post office was between Bell's Drugstore and the bank. It was a long, narrow affair. And you can see the windowsill. And the sign is above the doorway.
See, that was the picture they were taking in 41.
We don't want to go there yet. Yeah, you just have to wait. Cadillac.
There's a Cadillac.
Notice it's called the Beach Hotel at this point. I haven't any idea why.
Widows walk.
What sure is.
Dirt road also. And I'm not sure when that little annex to our left, when that disappeared. We're at the Four Corners, obviously, and this is another shot of the Four Corners. This is just after the parade for the centennial, 1934. And you can see the barber shop that I was talking about, the picture, the sign of the barber shop at that point. And I have, and I don't think that that's exclusive, there's several copies of it around, but I have a copy of that parade on VCR. Murph Patterson is driving a goat in a cart. If you know Murph. But the town certainly looks like it's packed, doesn't it?
Don't forget that was just up.
Here's probably my favorite shot. Yep, this is the Four Corners still. Cadillac, Clark's would be Foley's. Notice the building right next door was a dress shop. Eventually it was owned by Will Hatton, who ran the funeral home in Lexington for a long time. Notice the small band shell on the other corner, and that was kind of a little park where the gas station was.
Was it called M25 by then, or?
No, I do not think it was. I think it was the road to Port Huron, but I'm not sure. I don't think it was, at one point that used to be US 25. That was a federal road. But I don't think it was at this point. And notice the hitching rails. And if I didn't tell you, or if I'm repeating myself, I'm sorry, 1909.
That's going well.
This is still the Four Corners, and I've got that picture, only it's still a little wider on the bulletin board over there. Over on your left-hand side, which would be the Cadillac, my great-grandfather is sitting. You can't see him in that because it's been cut off. And this is a group of people called the Fair and Guard who used to come to the trailer park when it was a campground. And they would camp there every year in the summertime.
So the post office still there?
Now, the post office at this point, well, maybe, I'm not sure. The post office originally used to be where the town shop is today. And this is the 20s. I'm not sure when that post office moved. Not sure. What did we do here? I got two of the same
There's
thing.
Grandpa.
Now we're going south on M25. We're right about where Stee's is. The building on your right would be where the parking lot is for the taco shop. Guy standing over here on your left is named O'Connor, and he owns the Lexian, or whatever you want to call it at that time. It was called O'Connor's. And this is the 1922 Memorial Day Parade. I know that because I have film of that. I don't have anything to show it with anymore, but I have film. it takes a hand crank projector. I have the projector, but the projector doesn't work that well. And the film doesn't work that well either, which is really kind of a shame. We're still in that area. That building is, what's the name of the restaurant? Serendipity or, oh, it's Flying Taco, thank you.
No, it's serendipity again.
Oh, it's Serendipity. Seeing how things are changing? Cadillac is over on your right. Still a dirt road. We're still in that area. This is taken from the Cadillac, and it's looking southwest. The building in the background on the right-hand side, way back, with the cupola, is the school, K through 12. Background on your left is a German church. I'm not sure of the denomination, it just always says German church on maps. The buildings in the front are the cannery. Cannery is one of those things I forgot to tell you when we were at the peak. That's, what's the brand? Hart brand. And that was torn down and taken to Croswell, early 1900s. I have some shots, I don't know if I have those with me or not, of the inside of that as people were doing different processes with it.
What happened to that school?
It was torn down in the late 60s, early 70s. It was eventually condemned. I went to school there through the 8th grade. It was K through 12. I got a better picture of it someplace. Hopefully it's in the stack. It was K through 12. No, it would be where part of the building is today. Where the kindergarten, is the kindergarten down that hallway? No, it's not.
Actually, Tom, when they put the new wing on, the last two buildings to the east end, when they dug the hole for that, they found the foundation of the school.
Okay, it's the east side, yep.
So it's way at the east end.
Now, I've got a better picture of it someplace here, but it'll just take a minute. This is, this is one of the things that I think Lexington misses today. It was obviously a hangout where you came and sat, chewed, told stories, what have you. This is Crookshanks, and it would be right on the corner where the taco place was, except right on the corner. US 25 and Boynton Street. Eventually, there was a gas station there. Harold Ray had the gas station, then Elmer Teller, and then Patterson and Kinsley. And while the front of it kind of changed a little bit, it never changed from the standpoint of a place to go to find out everything that you wanted to know about Lexington. I worked there for a while in the middle 60s, and Patterson, the town used to pick up junk. They didn't contract somebody every Monday. The town went around, and the town truck came by one day, and it had this old stuffed chair on it, and Patterson stopped the truck and dragged the chair off and put it in the gas station. And I don't know how many of you remember, but Sid Cooper, that was his throne. He used to sit there. Yes, and it was missing a leg, but we had bricks under it.
Tom?
Yes.
Why is Boynton on one side of 25 and Boynton on the other?
Because it's supposed to be Boyntion. That's the way it's supposed to be.
Boy,
But when they made up some of those signs, they didn't realize it.
so that, I wondered if it was the Boynton in Fort Huron.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
That's the same family. And I think that Boynton also was up at Caseville. Not Caseville, what do I want to say? Grindstone City. Grindstone City in that area. We're still in the same area. See the Sunoco gas station?
Yeah.
That's where Crookshanks would have been, only it's a little bit later, because, right, it's a paved road. Restaurant over where the real estate office is today, that was Morgan's Restaurant. You'll notice that there's another gas station where the bank was. And there's another gas station up where, just past Serendipities, called, that's Standard Service. My guess is that this is the 1930s. Probably late 1930s. Well, it looks like it says US 25 over on the sign there. See it? And I can remember this, I picked this up from the gas station. I can remember talking to Charlie Tayton, and I think Charlie Tayton worked on building the road. Is that right, Tony?
Yes.
The cement road. I can remember him telling me about that. This is not the first school, but this is the first school that is on the site of the present school. This was moved up to the fairgrounds when they built the brick school that we'll see in just a second. There was another school that was up where Eastern Michigan Bank was located earlier. But I have not seen any pictures of that. Now, this there. Now, see, that's
the one
that says high school, but actually that's K through 12. Kindergarten through 12th grade. And you can, in the foreground is Vulcan Street. There was a street that ran all the way through there. That, I can remember thinking that playground was huge. But when I look at it today, I can't figure out how small it really was. But back then it just, and the gym was added. The building on the right was added in the 1930s. It was a very, very small gym, but it was our gym. And we certainly had a lot of good times in there. Played my first basketball game.
Do you have a notion of how many kids at one time?
The graduating classes usually ran 15 to 20, 25 maybe. It was not very big. Yes, they used to have the pictures in the hallways. I don't think they do it anymore.
I have no idea where they are.
And that's really kind of a shame. I have quite a few pictures of the graduating classes, and I also have a number of programs that somebody sent me from California, which really is kind of neat. And they go back to the late 1800s, which would be before the gym, and all the second floor of the town hall was where they had the graduation. Now, we went down Boynton Street. On your left, as you're going down Boynton Street, where it crosses Washington, there was a big ravine on either side of the road. I mean, a big ravine. Creek ran through there. And on that property, there was a big foundry that made farm equipment, late 1800s, and made organs on the second floor. Don't ask me how they got the organs and farm equipment, but they did. At one point, I thought an organ in this church, but that was made there, but I may be wrong.
Sandy says there's one right down the hall that was made there.
Okay, there we go. I did have it right. Thank goodness. You get the piling in the background is the piling from one of those docks that was taken out by the 1913 storm.
What's the white building?
Oh, I'm sorry. The white building is the flour mill. Now, there's some other pictures of that. But that was major industry in Lexington at that particular time. There's another picture of it. You're looking toward the lake. The road would be where the Lake Hill is down. Doesn't seem to be quite as imposing.
Was that the foundations that we see?
Yes, it is. Yep. The foundation you can still see going down the Lake Hill on your right-hand side.
A little bit.
Those old kind of. Now, we're still at the Lake Hill, or we're still at the lake. 1930s, the building on your left is D.C. Howard, who came from Harbor Beach and built that dock and complex. That building is now over on the right-hand side as you go down the hill. It's in front of the condos.
Yep.
That building was moved.
Yeah.
And the building on your right, far right, was a restaurant. I remember it as the Marine Dining Room. And Nancy and I used to go there quite often.
That burnt, didn't it? Huh?
The town burned it.
Oh, the town burned it?
The town burned it down to make way for the sandpiper.
Okay.
And I've got film of the Surfside sandpiper. Where'd I get sandpiper?
Sandpiper is down here.
Yes, okay.
Huh?
Surfside.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, folks.
Absolutely.
But I have film of that. And they had several different fire departments.
There's the old.
This is Myers Fishery. This is taken from out in the lake. My guess is that it's the second L that it was taken from. You can still see the just the outline of the flour mill and its smokestack in the background on the left. This fishery was owned by Mike Myers, who was a brother to Joseph Myers, who the school is named after. Joseph Myers had the hardware store. And I'll show you a picture of that, I think, in a minute. Am I running into trouble here, Attorney?
Got all day.
What else was there? This burned down. This burned down in 1944. So what you had was the dock with this big hole in the middle. And it was never, they just left it that way. But it was great for playing tag. And we played tag out there until no end. And there is probably at least one person in this room that used to get up on the top of that building and dive out into the lake.
That would be,
Well, I'm not going to tell who it is.
I know.
He can tell you.
yeah.
Now, this would be,
I think it was 20.
this, you see the circle? Okay, so that gives you kind of a reference point. The dock on your right is the Myers dock, and that's the fishery. And that is, I think I've got one of Myers's boat pictures in that group that you were passing around, the chief. And then this is D.C. Howard's dock on the other side. And obviously, fishing business was good at that time. In the background,
Yeah.
there are some
Yeah.
buildings, right-hand side, way to the back. Those were buildings for ice that they would take up from the lake and keep in there for the summer. There was also a spot to the right of that barn where you can't see it very well, and I saw some pictures, I've got some pictures of it, but I didn't put them in, of big poles that they would put the nets, the fish nets on to mend them and take care of them during the off-season. I had a gentleman 3 or 4 years ago come up from Detroit. He used to camp someplace up along the shore. He couldn't remember just exactly where, but he said it was really a great time, and I showed him this picture, and he said that he knew it immediately. The other hill, that would be the Simon Street Hill, he said they camped on the other side in that area where the parking lot is now. This is a picture earlier. These obviously are not in sequence, and no, I'm not drunk, I just can't get that straight. That's the beginning of the Myers Dock. And I would say probably right after World War I, sometime in there. You see that's a boat almost in the center, just a little left of center. That boat put in the piling. There was a big stone thing that went up that shaft, and then they would drop it down on the piling. That boat was still around when I was probably 6th, 7th, 8th grade maybe. They found a body in it. It was after World War II. And I can, they took them a long, long time to get the body out. They had all sorts of problems with it. And I can remember that it was after dark by the time they got things squared around, and I was scared to death to walk home. It was really a big deal for a while. There was nothing else that we didn't talk about but that.
Do you know what the occasion was that all the people were on the dock?
The occasion was that happened just a lot of times. People just were there. I don't, in this bulletin board over here, there's a picture of some of the Myers crew unloading fish, and then right below it, there's also a picture of people fishing off the dock. And it was crowded like that lots of times. Even after that thing burned and the dock was not in very good shape, you would still find lots and lots of people out there. Particularly the spring of the year, it always seemed to be a big deal in terms of catching fish. This is the Sheldon dock, or the Lexington Company dock, that came down at the end of Simon Street, and that's a freighter coming into dock there. Supposedly that ran out into the lake about a half a mile. It would be just about where you would walk to get out on the harbor today. That's a picture of Feed's woolen mill, which is just down to the north of the harbor by that creek where the log cabin is located today. There's another picture over on the bulletin board of Feed's mill. This picture does not do it justice. It was a big, big building. There was a lumber mill there before that. This burned down just about 1900. I think it was on 4th of July. But and they did not rebuild, they moved to Port York. But again, that was kind of on the roller coaster when you were on the decline. Still another picture. Building on your right is part of the flour mill, and that is Myers Dock. 20s. It has to be the 20s because D.C. Howard has not been there yet, and it's dirt. That pavement. I have a shot of Mike Myers, Edwina Shipley, that would be Mrs. Shipley, Lucy Shipley's daughter, and I don't remember who else is in the picture, cutting the ribbon when they got this portion paved. Mike worked very hard to get that paved.
What year was it paved?
Paved sometime in the 1930s. It must have been late 30s. I have the slightest idea outside of that. This is just another picture. I'll get you away from the harbor here in a minute. The building on your right with the barber's pole is Weekenders. Joe's Sweatshop is next, and then the next would be Wimpy's. This is looking toward the lake. The guy driving the car is Joe Myers. The gal sitting, well, the two people sitting in front with him are his children, Fred Meyer and Catherine Meyer, Catherine Kemp. His house was kitty corner from the church over here on the southeast corner of 25 and Hubbard Street. Tommy Dryden is there in the middle. Tommy Dryden ran the barbershop. And in the 1920s, University of Detroit's football team trained up here for two years. They came up to the campgrounds and stayed in one of the big buildings, and they ate their meals at the town hall, where, I don't know what you call it now, where Ehart's hardware store was, next to the IGA. Anyway, they made Tommy's barbershop a hangout and used to go down in the basement and smoke and drink. This is prohibition too, by the way. And when the coaches came into the barbershop, Dryden would tap on the floor with his foot and everything would be quiet. When I went to school at Eastern, I fiddled around and didn't get after it when I should have, and was late and had to meet with the Dean of Men. And the Dean of Men was a guy by the name of Bingo Brown, who had been a coach on this team. And the first thing he said after he found out that I was from Lexington is he said, "Do you know Tommy Dryden?" And of course I said, "Well, certainly I know Tommy Dryden. He cuts my hair." He was the only barber in town. And while it was somewhat dangerous at times, everybody had their hair cut. And he said, what I want you to do is I want you to go back and tell him that we knew all along what he was up to.
You get so drunk you wouldn't think you cut your hair.
This is this would be the part of the building on your left would be the hardware store of Joseph Myers. The rest of it is a general merchandising business that was big time, that Woods, Nims, where Doc Wilcox lived, Tewksbury's, where Watson Manor, they owned Watson Manor for a time, Pabst, Sleeper, the Governor, all operated out of there, and that was really a big-time operation for a time. The building down the street from that looks kind of like a house, and it looks obviously like a house to me, but it might not to you, was where, I'm not sure about, not at this time, but later on, when I was a kid, was where Sir Brooks lived, and he sold ice door to door when you still had an ice box. My grandmother never had a refrigerator. She always had an ice box. And you put up the sign in the window, 25 or 50 pounds of ice you wanted. And then, well, that would be just about where Ehart's Pharmacy is now, or the parking lot. Yep. And he had a kind of a garage to the back of that. And when I was a kid, she also ran the store down at the lake, and if you brought back your pop bottles and you had enough of them, she gave you a hot dog. But that was before the deposit business.
So is that the whole
Yes,
hotel?
ahead of her time. This is the brick building, the big brick building is part of the hardware store. The little white building was Shell gas station. It was built on that corner where I said they had the park for a time. Tewksbury's owned that, and they offered it to the village. The village didn't feel that they either had enough money or worth it. Star Oil bought it and put a gas station there. This is the honor roll for World War II that they're dedicated. And it's hard to pick out, but the guy that's reading, he's got his hand on his hip, reading, is Harry Shaw, who I believe was president of the village at that time. Doc Wilcox is up against the gas station, kind of partially bald-headed, just to the left of the flag. And that's me right down at the bottom, just by the flag, with the hat on. And it's some sort of a soldier's outfit, and I thought it was the biggest thing in the world. And that's my dad right in front. For whatever reason, always wore a hat. Not very clear, but that's the town hall.
Masonic building.
When was it built?
1876. The top floor was the Eastern Star Masonic, I'm not sure, Masonic.
The first, the two top floors of masonry.
The second one was kind
The
of,
ballroom,
which everybody kind of used though, didn't they?
where they'd rent it out, yeah.
Oh, is that, okay. And then the bottom floor, there was a kitchen to the back. That was where the UD football team was fed. And there was, it was for the fire department. And you also, that's where you voted. And it was one of the centers of society in Lexington. This is the second floor this is the second floor that Charlie's talking about. There was a stage in the back, and I can remember being up there for receptions, weddings, and there are several card about dances up there. I think there is, or maybe that was in the building. Anyway, this was one of the centers of the Cultural Society in Lexington. And all the graduations were held there. All of the school plays were held there. This is just looking at it from a different side.
When was that built, Tom?
1876. There was, if you look on my map on the other side, they'll tell you that there was some, it's either a clothing business or a furniture business that was in this spot, and it burned down. The original fire department was housed next to the Cadillac, to the south. Oh, you saw that.
Did they play basketball there before the gym was built?
No. They played basketball where the German church was, in that other picture that I showed you, looking at the cannery. The German church would be right where the taco place, Grandma's Tacos, or whatever tacos it is, on Boynton Street. And they played basketball there. That's where my dad played basketball. This is a much more current picture. I stuck it in there because the white building is where the IGA parking lot is. That was Mamie Matthews' house. Mamie was a great old gal as far as I was concerned. And the building on your right was an addition to the town hall, and that housed the new fire engine, and it also had the council rooms in back of that, and then in back of that there was a little spot for the DPW. And this is John Couts and Pete Couts had this car. I think that Pete or Connie, I don't know if they still have it out at the farm or not. But Doug has it, okay. But that was in all the parades, and they always had a lot of fun with it. Always.
What year was that?
Good question.
70?
No.
I would say 60s, but I'm not sure just
When
when.
were you on the council
When we
first?
moved here,
Hello?
kids were little.
When were you on the council first?
We're saying
When were you on the
probably middle, late 60s.
What year did you have the meetings there?
Yes.
70, 69 or 70.
That's what I thought.
I was in there.
I know.
Charlie Ellis is saying 69 or 70. Now, that's the last one. That's where the state bank is now, Eastern Michigan Bank, right on the corner. The reason I put it in, although that's really kind of a neat house, is notice the background. Nothing. That's true. Nothing back there. Isn't that amazing? Now, if we could have the lights, so we're not frightened of the dark.
Hello, everyone. After Tom Reagan had a slide presentation at the Episcopal Church, we go west to Croswell and the Presbyterian Church, and we have a couple of gentlemen with us today, and I'm sure that if you've been around Croswell any time at all, you recognize Harold Nehmer and Fred Pomeroy. Gentlemen, welcome to the 50-plus reunion video.
My name's Harold Nehmer, and I'm one of the oldest ones in your class reunion here.
My name's Fred Pomeroy, and I'm getting close to it.
You're the younger of the bunch,
I'm
eh?
the youngest one of the bunch.
Well, that's good news. First thing, do you remember anything that took place in Croswell, Harold, as far as maybe long ago or whatever the case might be?
Yes, I was born right next door to the W.R. Roach canning factory, and my playtime wasn't. Didn't have any friends around there because there were no children in our neighborhood really. So I spent all my time over watching them build the factory there, at the canning factory, they were building the warehouse. And of course, I learned some good choice words there from the fellows would hit their finger or something like that, and then they'd say some words that I learned, and I had a good vocabulary over there.
I had a great uncle that, believe it or not, when they were putting the silage into play, he had to be hired in order to fit that silage so that the pea silage, so it was done upright. And I don't remember how long he worked there, but I remember the old canning factory, that's for sure.
Yeah, they had, most of the peas were brought in by wagon loads, horse and wagons. And, well, in fact, there were no trucks that I remember. It was all horse and wagon. And then they would unload the vines there, and then they all had to be processed in order to get the peas out of the vines there. And then all these vines were stacked in a big stack, and that stayed in that stack till Christmas time. And then when they opened that, and the farmers would come in to get the pea silage, and fermented stuff, you could smell them for miles. And we didn't want them to come into the store because the farmers would come in with their boots to just tromping around on that stuff, and they had a load of that out in front. They were taking it home, but then they had to come in to get their watch checked or something, find out what time it was. And oh man, when they came in the store, and that odor was worse than rotten, I guess.
I could be wrong, but I think the sugar factory has taken over the bad odor department.
Well, they're about a second. They're a close second, but they never could top that pea silage when that was rotten.
Yeah, we were talking before we started taping this, and both of these gentlemen were born and raised in the Croswell area. Fred, what's the first thing that you remember about Croswell?
Sitting on the front steps of the house with the Kirkpatrick kids and Reverend Gage's kids, waiting for the wagons of peas to come in so we could get an armful of peas.
I think I remember that operation.
We used to sit there and we'd go out and get them and then sit on the curb and shuck them and eat them.
Yeah. You never took any home to cook?
Always.
I thought so. Okay, both of these guys, as we mentioned, were born and raised in the area. Harold down by the pea factory. Now, where were you brought up? In what house?
Right across the street from the church, which is now the funeral home.
Yeah, and there were what? Gary is what, the fourth generation?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, maybe something that I remember about the early days of Croswell. You folks had a store downtown, and I can remember going down there. We had 2 frozen food lockers, one for meat and one for berries. Can you tell us what was the other aspects of that store?
Well, we had furniture and appliances, wallpaper, paint, everything you needed for the house. And then along about 1935, I guess it was, Dad put in frozen food lockers. And then during the war, he doubled the size of it, so we wound up eventually with about 725 individual lockers. And they were there until, oh gosh, I don't know, I think we finally tore them out in about 1965, somewhere along in there.
Yeah.
Because home freezers had taken over, and Ernie Bernhardt, Leonard and Betty Papps' in-law, was the meat cutter, and we finally got rid of the lockers. Back to paint, wallpaper. Well, we did have some groceries in there for a while, but that didn't last too long.
Yeah. I kind of remember as a side conversation as far as preserving food, and of course during the war a lot of people were canning and that type of thing, but I believe that, and it seems to me it was Don Riemann, older Don, that was in charge of kind of a canning outfit, if I'm not mistaken, downtown.
That was in the old cold storage building down there next to the Croswell laundromat. And every summer, he would have a canning school going there. And people bring their stuff in, and he would run it through the canners and can it for them.
Of course, a big item, this kind of falls in with what Harold talked about, was the canning factory where they lived next to, the old Hart brand. That was a big item, and they were in business for a lot of years. I think they came over from the west side of the state, Hart, Michigan, right?
They came from Hart, Michigan over here. And Lloyd Dumont was the superintendent of the factory at the time, and he helped kind of organize that whole thing, I guess. He was the manager and everything.
Here,
The brand you know by heart.
Yeah.
that's right. Maybe Harold could tell us a little bit about the Nehmer's jewelry store.
Yeah, my father came into the Croswell from the farm out in near Roseburg, and he didn't want to be a farmer. His father was a farmer, and he didn't want to be a farmer, so he came in. He tinkered with watches out there, and finally came into Croswell and asked one of the jewelers there if he could be an apprentice, and that was up in the A.B. Graham drugstore. And so a fellow said, yes, he'd be glad to have him. So my dad worked there, came in and worked there, a kid from the farm, and worked on clocks, and then gradually down to watches. And the other man was he was a watchmaker, so he worked there for about, I guess, probably 7 or 8 years, and then they had a little argument, and he quit and went across the street over to where R.A. Turrell drugstore was, and he took his bench and went over there, and he did watch repairing there. He had a little problem there because my father spoke German, and a lot of the farmers around here were German, and they would come in and they would want Dad to wait on them because the other people couldn't understand what they wanted in the drug line. So my dad was up waiting on half of the people there, and he wasn't getting his watch work done. So he went to finally the bankers offered him a chance to buy a millinery store down at the south end of town, right where our store is now, where there's a millinery store. So he bought that and remodeled the front of it to make a jewelry store, and the back end of it was our home. And I lived there until I went in the Army. I was still living there in that same house there.
Yeah, I look at the top of your head, and I think you inherited some good crop of hair from your dad, didn't you?
Yeah, he had a good crop of white hair. Yep, yes. He had a big stomach too, and I don't have that yet. I'm working on it.
I can remember going into the store as a little guy, and that was one thing I noticed about his hair. He had a beautiful head of hair, and I suspect he had that up until the day he died, didn't he?
Yes, he did. Yep.
What about some of the other business places in Croswell and the area, Harold?
Well, some that come to mind are the 10-cent barn. People come into town and with their horses, and they would go to the 10-cent barn and unhitch their horses there, and I guess it was just 10 cents to leave them all day, and they would water them and give them a little bit of hay, I guess. And I'm not too sure, but they always called it the 10-cent barn. I assume that's what it was. And then there was Todd's Ice Cream Parlor. They manufactured ice cream, or they processed ice cream there, I guess, anyway. Started from scratch, and he made his own ice cream. And that was a real favorite place in town. And then there's P.A. Hall had a gas pump out on the main street, if you can imagine that, right on the curb. So in order to get your gas put gas in your car, you had to drive right up to the curb, and the gas pump was right out there, and the gas pump would, to pump the gas up into a big globe up above the pump, and it would hold it held 10 gallons, I guess, and then you would turn the little tap on the bottom, and you'd drain out how much gas. And I guess it was all guesswork because you didn't know whether you were getting 4 gallons or 4.5 gallons or something like that, because you had to stand back and look up at that thing. It was about 4 feet above your head, and try to guess where the gauge was, or where the mark was on the side of the glass, or the glass dome up there. And that was P.A. Hall's gas pump there, but he finally got rid of that.
Maybe you can tell us a little bit about the schools that you went to here in the area, and maybe the teachers, administrators, or other staff members.
2 of the schools are gone. We ruined them.
Yeah.
The old grade school across the river.
That's an apartment complex now.
Yep. And what used to be the high school here, that's gone. Got a new school in there.
The only thing remaining is the gym, right?
Yes, that was christened in 39, 38 or 39. Long in there.
The ceiling in this prostic room was lowered a few years back, and of course there were about 5 rods that fit from one side to the other, and I think the first year or so the high school guys played their opponents in here. It's hard to believe that this was capable of maybe the different teams in this area playing basketball, but I guess, well, in fact, when I was a kid, we played basketball in here. They took I guess maybe the rods are still up there, maybe.
I wouldn't have any idea.
Yeah.
It better be, or the walls will fall out.
Now, actually, this room, which they used for the gymnasium, the fellows actually, in the basement down here, they had locker rooms where they had kept their uniforms and everything down in the basement of the church here, instead of at the school. So they'd come here and they get dressed right here in the Presbyterian church basement, and then they come upstairs to the basketball hall. This hall originally was a church in Amador, and they moved this particular part of the church here, and it was just wide open, and it was one of the finest basketball courts in the area, because Deckerville was upstairs in a building. Brown City was down in, they had a basement that they played in the basement, and so they liked to come to Croswell because this was a nice, clean gymnasium here, and it was one of the better ones until they built the gymnasium over here next door here. I don't know what year that was. It must have been about in the 30s someplace, 34, 35, was it? When
38, 39.
38 or 39. So can you imagine, they played till 38 or 39. This was the basketball court for the high school.
Where did the people sit? Around in chairs, or?
No, on this wall, on the one wall here was bleachers. They had wooden bleachers, I guess probably about five rows of bleachers along the one side. And the other side, you couldn't, if they had an overflow crowd or something, they opened up the doors into the church, and the people stood in the church and watched. They looked over top of a railing, and they could watch the basketball game from inside the church. It was kind of an unusual setup.
Do you recall any of the teachers or maybe staff members? Or I suppose in those days, not that I'm dating you, but probably most of the kids brown bagged it or whatever you call it.
Well, they didn't serve lunches or stuff like they do today.
Yeah.
Of course, I just lived across the street, so I went home to eat.
Oh, yeah. But what about, who was the superintendent in those days, maybe?
Well, you had Heemstra and Benjamin. Who came after Benjamin? Oh,
Stanley Benjamin, yeah.
Cobb, maybe.
Cobb, Norm Cobb.
Yeah.
And then, the guy that was over, I think he went over from here, I think he went over to north of Lapeer.
Yeah. Well, I can remember those two guys, Benjamin and Cobb.
Well, you were probably in trouble with them most of the time.
Only one time did I get booted out. That was for throwing coins off the blackboard.
Oh, yeah.
And Harlan Hall was standing up on the first floor. Well, I guess it was not a first floor, but up watching me through the window, and I didn't see him.
By the way, where did you get the coins? We didn't
Well-
have many those days.
Oh, you didn't? Son of a gun. Well, some of the other important people in the community, maybe you recall some of them, do you?
Well, Doc Hart, Doc Lermont, old-time residents, were here for many years.
Dr. Martin?
Dr.
Yeah.
Martin,
Dr. Martin, the dentist, yep.
and Geiger.
Yeah. I was just telling someone yesterday that Doc Martin rode by our place. We lived up on North Howard in the wintertime in a cutter, and he parked it at the 10-cent barn. And then in the summertime, he rode his bicycle. But the point I tried to make was that at one time, he was the oldest practicing dentist in North America.
I wouldn't doubt that because he had, in order to keep the drill going, he had a foot pedal. And he pumped this foot pedal while he was, to make the drill go. And I know I had one filling down there and that was it. Because it was, his arm was moving all the time from the motion where they're pumping that foot pedal there to make the drill work. I never went back for that. So I let my teeth rot out before I go back and have another filling in there.
He was a wonderful guy, though.
Yeah.
You couldn't help but like the guy.
He used to chase me around the street saying, "You got to get another filling in that tooth of yours, your teeth." I was afraid to go back.
Well, then there was Lou Frosty. Lou rode his bike until he was, 90-some-odd years old?
Yeah.
And that bicycle he bought from my grandfather about 1912, and I have it. It's hanging up in our garage, our warehouse.
It's probably worth quite a lot of money.
Well, I wouldn't have any idea about that.
Okay, excuse me.
I was just going to say, one time somebody stole our daughter's bicycle, so I got that out for her to ride. And the neighborhood kids were riding it so darn much I had to take it away from them.
Both of you guys were in the service, both in the Army, I guess, right?
Yes, yep. Oh, let's go back to school for one more thing.
Okay.
Well, as a freshman in high school, I just got in there, and the boy who had been the cheerleader. They only had one cheerleader in high school, and this fellow had he decided he wasn't going to cheerlead anymore, so they had to have a assembly in the assembly room to elect a new cheerleader. So everybody, somebody from the freshman and the sophomore and junior and senior classes would each send a candidate in there to lead a cheer, you know. And I was a freshman there, and I led a cheer, and I was elected out of the assembly room, voted me the cheerleader for the Croswell High School. Wasn't any Croswell then. It was Croswell High School cheerleader. And I cheered through the football season and through the basketball season and out to baseball season. And I was out at a baseball game and for the high school, and some of the students wanted me to lead a cheer. And I said, well, you don't cheer baseball games. Who ever heard of cheering, having a cheering section at a baseball game? Well, you cheer, or you get out there and cheer, or we're going to report you. So they reported me to Superintendent Heemstra, so he called me in and he said, I heard you refused to cheer out there at the baseball game, lead a cheer for the kids. And I said, yeah, I'd never heard of that before at a baseball game. And he said, well, if you're going to be out there as a cheerleader, you're going to have to lead the cheers. And I said, well, I quit. So I fired myself as cheerleader, so I was the only one in high school there at that time. So next year they got a new cheerleader.
Harold, of course, had a real nice series in the Lakeshore Guardian. Of course, one of the big aspects of his Army career, I guess you were captured twice, weren't you?
Yes, it was. The second time was, well, the first time was genuine. I mean, the Germans actually caught me the first time, the soldiers. And they were, well, we were getting pretty well shot up right at that particular moment. Later, after I was a prisoner, rode through the boxcars and that. Well, in fact, I was in 4 different prison camps. The first one I rode over was away over near Poland, and fortunately our train didn't happen to get strafed because the Americans were strafing, they're shooting up all the planes or the trains. There were 60 of us in this one boxcar that I was in, and there was no room to sit down. You had to stand up. And so they decided, well, if half of the guys on one side of the car would sit down, we'd move our feet so that they could sit down and get their feet stretched out. They were narrower cars than the regular train cars. And so they would sit down for maybe 2 or 3 hours, and then we'd tell them to stand up, and then we'd be able to sit down for 2 or 3 hours. Otherwise, you rode up, standing up all the time. And the bathroom facilities weren't the best. It was, they had, I guess I shouldn't mention this, but they did have one can that was passed from the one end. There was one little opening at the one end of the car where they could empty this can out. And then it would be passed down to, imagine, to 60 men there, and you pass this can along. If you're at the end of the line, you never saw it.
I thought maybe you were going to say that everybody had to do their business in their helmet.
We didn't have helmets left anymore. Nothing left in there. Just our plain, what we were wearing is when we were captured. No helmet.
Many years ago, when Fido's great-great-great-great-grandfather was a pup, I went in the service, and we went out of Sandusky on a bus. But where did you folks go out? Sandusky? Or?
Yep, I did. Mm-hmm. Did you go out of Sandusky, Harold?
Yes, I left out of Sandusky also.
The old post office, right?
Oh,
or
no.
the post office.
I remember being over in front of the Presbyterian Church in Sandusky.
Oh, okay. Did you guys, you probably went in about the same time, didn't you?
I don't know. I went in October, I think it was, of 42. Got out just before Christmas in 45.
Yeah.
I went in June 40.
Yeah. Well, where did you fellows have your basic? Both the same place or different places?
Oh no, we were both scattered.
Yeah.
I went down to Louisiana to start with, and then wound up. I was all over the United States there during my basic training and stuff like that.
There was no Fort Wayne then at that time, or maybe there was.
I imagine there was, but we didn't happen to go through it.
Yeah.
I went from Sandusky to Camp Wallace, Texas.
Wow.
Which was near Houston, I guess it was.
Yeah. Well, Any final comments there, Fred?
No, I think it's unusual to sit here and talk with you about the old days,
The good old days,
the
right?
good old days.
How about those good old nights?
Well, we had a few of those too.
Nothing else, eh?
Nothing else.
Fred has always been kind of a silent man, haven't you?
I think so. There are people that will argue that point.
You don't want to get his ire up. What are you, German or what? Descent? Or maybe
Scotch and German.
Scotch and German. That's a good combination.
I think so.
Harold, any final comments?
No, I was just thinking as kids, though, we always made our own toys and stuff, you know. Used to get a piece of I think it was willow, a little piece of willow, you know, and then you'd kind of strip the bark off it and you cut a couple of notches in and you could make a whistle. I mean, you spend a lot of days making those whistles because it was kind of a, I suppose somebody showed us how to do it in the first place, but I can remember making a lot of those. And then for recreation, sometimes you had to make something, and I remember we'd take a wheel, and well, first of all, we'd had, and for a skateboard, why we'd have a pair of old skates, to get a pair of old stainless steel skates, and you'd nail them on the bottom of a 2x4, and then you'd nail another 2x4 straight up, and then it was a scooter. You could scoot all over town with that on the skates. Later, I did get a pair of skates to skate with, though. We used to get a wheel, an old wheel off in a baby carriage or something like that, a little small wheel. And then you'd nail two sticks together and then make it like a cross stick. And then you'd roll this wheel down the one stick, and then you'd push it all over the wheel, all over town. You could make it turn the corners and everything else with it when you got skilled. And man, you'd chase that wheel all over town. And I remember Ferris Gardner had one that was a steel wheel, and it was better than anybody else's.
Was it a General Motors?
No, it wasn't. But it was a nice little steel wheel about. Gosh, I always envied that one there because I didn't have one that good.
Well, we want to thank both of you gentlemen for sitting in and having this little conversation for the folks at the 50-plus reunion. This is Bob Cudney saying so long for now. We'll see you down the road.